Hi everybody, this is Damien from Legend Life. As you know, we're all about sharing inspirational stories about people who are living their best life. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with James Hendry. James is something of a modern day Renaissance man. He is a wildlife guide, wildlife presenter. He's done over 50 TV shows around wildlife. He's also an author, musician and photographer. So how are you going today, James?
Fine, very well. It's lovely to be talking to you and, well, sharing stories from across the world.
Awesome. So, well, to get started, maybe you can give us a little bit of a background about yourself and where your passion for wildlife and the outdoors kind of started.
I suppose my passion for the outdoors started as a kid. I didn't really go into guiding or game ranging with an idea that that's what I wanted to do. All I knew growing up was that I wanted to live in a beautiful place. So for sort of 20 years of my professional life, and by professional I just mean working life, I've lived in game reserves pretty much around South Africa, a bit in Kenya and a little bit in Botswana as well. And the kind of guiding thing was almost secondary. I just realized I knew that I wanted to live in a beautiful place, and I managed to find a job that allowed me to do that, which was great. That's how it kind of began.
Okay, so because you did study in university some topics related to what you ended up doing.
Yeah, no, I studied zoology and rangeland science, basically. So ecology, general ecology. And I went back to university a bit later to do a master's in people and parks. So obviously one of Africa's greatest conservation challenges is the nexus or interface between rural people and protected areas. And so I did a lot of work around that. Yeah, I really didn't ever have, and probably still don't have a goal or idea of where life will take me, and I suspect that's half the reason that I've done, I suppose, quite a few different things that other people may not have. You know, people who go into more traditional career paths. I know they always tell you should have a goal and some kind of end objective in mind or in view, and I don't think I ever have, and that's maybe been a hindrance in some ways, but a help in other ways.
Okay, well, you know, like I think like you've kind of like identified what your passions are, and then you've kind of like tried to live your life according to, I want to live in beautiful places. And then, you know, so that's something personal to you. A lot of people aren't actually living something personal to them, are they? They're kind of like going along with society's kind of like deal, choosing paths someone else suggested for them. So, you know, so I don't think how you've kind of lived is wrong. You've just kind of identified what's kind of like right for you, and then kind of like found things that allowed you or enabled you to kind of like live that kind of a life. So which is pretty cool, actually. So so tell us about the 10 years working as a wildlife guide. So what were they like?
It's about 15 years.
15.
I actually, I started when I was in the year 2000. I was actually dragged off to the bush by a girlfriend who said we were going to the bush, and I was absolutely terrified of her. So I went along with the idea, and I actually had no idea what a wildlife guide did. I had studied this rangeland science. I thought maybe I'd be counting grasses or walking transects and counting animals. It turned out that I was going to be guiding people, fairly high-paying international tourists, on a Land Rover. And mercifully, the people who trained us decided that the, shall we say, less than forthcoming personality of my girlfriend wasn't going to work, so they got rid of her and they kept me, astoundingly. And so she carried on to go on and do other things. I'm being very nasty about her, but you know, you do silly things when you're young. And I then suddenly found myself in this world of discovery, and I was fascinated by it, and I enjoyed the theater of it. I enjoyed the theater of being a guide. And so I could combine this sort of enjoyment of performance and speaking and the bush all together. And so I started guiding at a place called Ngala, which is in the Greater Kruger National Park. And I spent 5 years there. I actually only guided full time, probably for about 3 of those years. And the rest I was doing training and that sort of stuff. And I found that the guiding was quite tricky because I'm relatively introverted one-on-one, and you meet new people all the time. And it's very few people that can make that kind of job a career. And so most people do it for 2 or 3 years, and then go back to the city or whatever it is that they're going to do. And I just stayed on because I wanted to be in a beautiful place. And so I did training, and I did some lodge management and land management and that sort of stuff. And latterly, much more latterly, I went back to the bush to be a live TV guide, which was the best job I ever had. It was just fantastic because there were no guests involved. It put me in front of a camera, which stroked my fragile ego. And I lived in beautiful places. And there I lived in the Kruger, I lived in Kenya, and experienced the migration in the Mara 3 or 4 times, which was just unbelievable. And all the time I was sharing it with other people around the world. And just in case you don't know how it works, there's a camera on the back of the car with a whole lot of broadcast equipment. And so we'd take live drives, like you might watch a live sportscast or something like that. And that was a fantastic job. You'd have live questions coming in from people sitting anywhere in the world. Could have been Brazil, England, America, Australia, didn't matter. And people watching would say, how old is that lion? Or how many legs does that centipede have? That sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And that was great. And unfortunately, that came to an end about a year ago. It's a media job, and media just, it changes. And so the company I was working for ran out of money. And so now I find myself back in Johannesburg, still working in conservation. I work for a wonderful organization called Africa Geographic, and I edit their online magazine. So still involved in conservation, just not guiding.
Okay, brilliant. So you mentioned the stampede. What other kind of like memorable experiences have you had? I mean, I know they're innumerable, but what would be the top 3 or 4?
Oh, it's it's the kind of question you hate being asked because it's almost impossible to answer. It's like me asking you what's your favorite song, and you'll go and you'll have 10 or 20. So I'll just select a few that come to mind first off. I think one of the most profound things that we have to do as trainee guides was to walk the reserve we were working on unarmed and alone, which, when I initially heard about this, I thought this is the most ridiculously stupid idea in the world. I mean, I'm definitely going to die. People obviously die doing this. And they gave me a little bit of training and then said, well, off you go. And they gave me a radio and a first aid kit. And the first aid kit I didn't check until I was sort of halfway through my week of walking. You went back to camp every night, but then you went out in the day. And the first aid kit, I remember opening it and finding a condom, a safety pin, and a Band-Aid. And that was it. That was all that was in there. So I'm not sure how it was going to help me if I came into difficulty. But the first really profound experience that I had on those walks was I was walking along a road fairly late one afternoon, and I came across 20 wild dogs. Now, I'd never seen wild dogs on foot before. Although I'd done this degree, it was entirely theoretical. I had no practical experience of being in the bush. As kids, we went to the mountains and we did spend a bit of time in game reserves, but I'd never walked and been on foot in a place like the Kruger before. So I had no idea what to do. I'd been told what to do if you see a lion and if you see an elephant and if you see a buffalo. I had no idea what these 20 dogs were going to do though. So 20 of them just stood up in the bush because they obviously heard me coming long before I saw them. And one of them gave off this alarm bark, and it sounds like it sounds halfway between a dog barking and a baboon barking. And I froze and I just stared at them. and they looked at me, and we sat there. You know, when your adrenaline's up, the ability to count or calculate time disappears. So I don't know how long we sat staring at each other. And eventually I used a word that in South Africa means go away. So voetsek. And I went, voetsek. It's what you say to an animal or a dog when it attacks you. You kind of say that and hopefully it'll frighten it off. And the pack scattered. And I remember feeling a tremendous sense of loss that I'd done that, because I wasn't able then to appreciate just being in the presence of those predators. Without there being a threat from either side. You know, we stopped, everyone was just assessing the situation, and I, as the human being, panicked. So that was one great experience. What's another one? Actually guiding people. This is the most terrifying experience I ever had. I was watching some wild dogs again with people in the car, and they were Americans and some South Africans who'd emigrated to America and who'd brought their friends out. So it was a car full of kind of mixed South African American sort of people. And we were watching these wild dogs, and they suddenly got a fright and chased something out of a bush, and it was a leopard, and the leopard went running up a tree. And so we thought, this is great. I mean, this is amazing. And we're watching the wild dogs, and the leopard was looking down at the dogs and growling. And every so often he'd look at us and growl as well. And he eventually came down the tree, and the dogs chased him, and he went up another tree. And he'd sit in the top of the tree, and we followed through. And there's very thick bush everywhere, so it's quite difficult to see what's going on. All you could see was, you'd see the dogs run, the leopard run, and then nothing, and then the leopard would go up a tree that came out of the bush. So you'd mow down through the bush in the Land Rover and park where you could see it all unfolding. And this happened sort of 4 or 5 times. And then the leopard came down and ran, and we heard the dogs catch him. And it was only 3 wild dogs, and it was a young male leopard. So we were driving through the bush trying to find what was going on. We got round, sort of came around a termite mound, and there, pinned under a fallen tree, was the leopard with the 3 dogs on top of him. And I don't know if they would have killed him, because I mean, a leopard is a formidable animal. Maybe they would have just harassed him a bit, but whatever the case, as we came around the corner or around this termite mound, with a big noise, the dogs let the leopard go. And the leopard looked at us, and he came straight at the car. And I don't know if you know, those game drive vehicles are set up, but normally there's a tracker sitting on the front of the bonnet. And we had a policy where if you were in a predator situation or predator sighting, you'd put the tracker on the back of the car, mostly so that the guests wouldn't have to look through him to look at the predator, because normally there's no danger at all. Well, this leopard jumped straight onto where the tracker sat and started mauling it. And I mean, I by this stage reversed up into the termite mound, so I couldn't go anywhere. And the leopard dropped off the front of the car. And meanwhile, the dogs had come up, and they were all so close that I actually couldn't see where they were, because they were so close in front of the vehicle. And the tracker, very experienced guy, said to me, he said, you need to move now, because that leopard's going to come again. And I said, well, where do you want me to go? The animals are in front of us. The termite mound's behind us. What can I do? And I was young, very inexperienced, very hot-headed. And sure as nuts, the leopard did come again, but this time he came at my door, and there was no door on the Land Rover. So he came at my leg. So I just panicked, threw the car in reverse and swung the wheel. And the car went ramping up the side of the termite mound like that. And the tracker was going, whoa, 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 whoa. Because obviously if the Land Rover flips, then you got a real mess on your hands, because there's no roof. There's no way to protect anybody once they're out the car. So I stopped the car, and thankfully had swung enough for the leopard to jump back onto the bonnet. And I mean, he could have come straight into the vehicle and mauled us all. And he savaged the tracker seat again, dropped off. Dogs were still there, but they kind of fell off to one side, and I just floored it. And we gapped it through, smashed a tree about that fat on the way out, and kept going. And we stopped about sort of 400 meters later, and I was shaking like a leaf. The guests thought this was absolutely brilliant entertainment. They thought this was exactly what they'd come to Africa for, and nothing I could say would convince them that they'd been in real danger and that actually that's not what this is about.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was the most dangerous kind of situation I was ever in, I think. I mean, I may well have been in much more dangerous ones where I just didn't realize it.
Yeah.
And I think that does actually happen quite a lot in the bush. So that's another one. And then I suppose the first time I saw the migrating herds of, the great wildebeest migration crossing the Mara River, it's a tremendously cliched safari kind of image, but there's a reason for that. And it's just it's a quite fantastical, stunning thing to see. And we spent about, I think it was 3 years in Kenya, each migration season, watching the predators hunting those herds, the herds crossing the river, and just being in amongst such abundance in the wilderness was very profound in a way, just by being in it, but also slightly sadly, because I think there are a lot of other places around the world, certainly, and definitely in Africa and my own country, where there was such abundance and it's now gone. It's been removed from the face of the earth by human encroachment largely. So that's a couple of stories.
Oh, brilliant. Awesome. So what is it you love so much about sharing, obviously these kinds of experiences with others, both as a presenter and then obviously as a guide?
Two things. One very selfish and one perhaps not so much. One is that I really enjoy performing, and being in front of a camera is something that I really enjoy. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. That's what it is. And then I guess the second part of it is that while I was enjoying myself doing this, I felt like we were making a real difference. And certainly during lockdown, we had a massive audience every day. We do this every day, these live drives.
Yeah.
And we were having 16,000 people watching contiguously, and then up to 120,000 afterwards. So every drive was having a big effect for a lot of people stuck inside. And I felt like we were making a contribution to the collective healing of humanity, if you like. All these people stuck with no ability to get into the wild. I was tremendously lucky to be on the reserve during lockdown.
Yeah.
And so all these people with absolutely no way of getting out to see a wild thing or experience a wild place, I felt like we were making a difference there. And likewise, with the guiding and with the other live presenting outside of lockdown, I felt like there was a teaching element to it, which felt valuable.
Yep. No, great. So for you, what are some of your favorite places that you've visited so far in Africa? I know there's probably multiple, but
the Masai Mara really is an absolutely spectacular part of the world. So I've described that quite a lot. It's, there's a reason they shot out of Africa there. There's a reason they made the Lion King look like the Mara or the Serengeti. It's just, there's something that really connects to the human soul, I think. And I mean, it's not everybody's favorite safari destination. It's most people's favorite safari destination, but not everybody's. And then I think Namibia, we did a car trip around Namibia once, and then I shot something in Namibia once, a little sort of kiddies film.
yeah,
And that's just endless space with so few people. There are only 2.5 million people living in Namibia, and it's a country it's almost the same size as South Africa, which has 50 million people in it.
yeah,
and so that vast desert space, amazing mountains, beautiful coastline, that whole country is just magnificent, especially if you like taking pictures. So I'd say Namibia and the Mara have been my two favorite places in Africa to go.
Okay. So, and what about wildlife? Do you have any personal favorites?
Um, Again, it's a little bit like, what's your favorite song? I,
Yeah.
I would say leopards and wild dogs would be my favorite animals. Um, Leopards are they're the most photogenic of all animals. It's difficult not to take a good picture of a leopard. And I remember when I started guiding, seeing all these amazing leopard shots and thinking, gosh, those photographers must be incredible. And in actual fact, you've got to be a rather terrible photographer if you go on to a decent safari destination and still can't get a good shot of the leopard. So they're amazing. And I mean, their behavior, we got to spend so much time with individuals to the extent that you learned their individual personalities. It wasn't like it's a wild animal. You got to know that animal, how it would react, its quirks, its sort of strange personality. And that was very special because it really gave you an in-depth look at animal behavior. And at the same time, a lot of scientists and people, not so much these days, but certainly in the past, would try and make sure that, or intimate that, people shouldn't have this kind of connection with wild animals. We must draw a line and we must just observe.
Yeah.
And be unemotional about our interaction with wilderness. I mean, that's just insane. To anybody who's actually spent time with wild animals, and intimately with wild animals, it's not possible unless you're psychopathic. And so I feel that kind of time spent with those animals was just a tremendously powerful way to connect with wilderness.
Yep.
And by connecting with wilderness, the whole idea of caring for nature and caring for the earth becomes that much stronger. It's why safaris are important. It's far, as much as they're important for tourism, because tourism brings dollars and to areas that need to be conserved and helps people around conserved areas. It's tremendously important for people who go on safari to connect with something wild, because if you don't, it just doesn't make any sense when somebody says, you need to look after X and Y and you need not to use so much plastic, etc.
Yeah.
If you don't have a wild connection, you just don't, it doesn't mean anything.
Yep. No, definitely. So what's your current perspective on the status of conservation in Africa?
I think it's in a very difficult space right now. I think there are a lot of people doing a lot of very good work, but I think that the population increase in Africa, which is, although Africa doesn't have a lot of people in it compared with, say, Asia, nothing like.
Yeah.
The population's growing at a nasty rate, and we don't have a huge amount of economic activity that can support the number of people that are coming. And a lot of these people in rural areas, on the borders of protected areas,
Yep.
they're very hungry. They are desperate in many respects. There's a lot of drought. It's never been a climate, no part of Africa, other than for sort of central places like Rwanda and Burundi, no part of Africa is easy to live in.
Yeah.
Because there's either a drought or there's a flood or there's a disease or whatever it is. And so the burgeoning population is our greatest challenge. And it's the biggest challenge that conservation faces. And until that population stops growing, which doesn't look like it's going to happen, I think we've got big trouble.
Yep.
And the problem is also that, the Western world, I think, looks at Africa and says, well, why don't you guys look after your stuff better than you are looking after it? Because it's a global asset, without remembering that, of course, the whole of Asia, the whole of the Americas, the whole of Europe used to be covered in wild animals.
Yeah.
And they're just long gone. And the fact that it's now the same process is repeating in Africa it's it's kind of almost inevitable. We do have the power to do something about it. I think that we're certainly making an effort to do something about it, and I hope that we'll succeed. But, you know, if people can't eat and people can't look after their kids, you know, things are going to be tough.
Yeah, no, understood. Yeah, very complicated
Yeah.
situation with no
Yeah.
easy answers. So,
No.
so
And
what
each
sort?
area is different, you know.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
So, but I do agree with you. It's very easy from a Western perspective to look and then go, "Oh, this is all terrible." You know, you need to be doing something
Mm.
about it, without also understanding the realities of the place itself. So I guess
Yeah.
safaris are a good opportunity to get more people out there, not only for the economic contribution they make, but also create a little bit more awareness so they actually can see what is the situation as opposed to looking at it remotely. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
so what's on your personal bucket list with regard to Africa? I mean, I know you've covered probably a lot in your time, but there must be some things still on that list which you haven't ticked off, but
Yeah.
would like to tick off.
There, there are quite a few. For me, it's primates at the moment. I really want to get, I've never seen gorillas or chimpanzees in the wild. And there are a number of places you can do that. You can do that in Rwanda if you're prepared to sell a kidney to go and do it, or you have a hedge fund.
Yeah.
You can do it in Uganda for slightly less money, but I really want to go to Gabon, to Central Africa, where it's a relatively stable country. It just looks like it should be the next tourism hotspot. It's looked like that for a long time, but I think they might be on the point of recovering now.
Yeah.
You know, you've got these game reserves, forested and savanna, that come down onto the beach. And so you'll find elephants on the beach. You'll find hippos on the beach. You have areas where you can see chimpanzees and gorillas. They're not as habituated as they are in Rwanda or Uganda, or even in the Congo, but it's got everything. And so I really want to go and spend some time in Gabon. That would be, if somebody said, where in Africa do you want to go now? I would say, let me go and spend 3 months there and see what's going on, because it's still quite wild as well, you know.
Yeah. No, awesome. Any other
Yeah.
spots?
Lots. North Africa, I'd love to spend some time in the Sahara. I've never been to Morocco. I would really like to go to Morocco and spend some time, ideally on horseback in the Sahara. I've always wanted to do that. And you can do that kind of thing, especially out of Morocco. So that would be very cool. Because North Africa north of the Sahara feels, I think, like a totally different continent. It's not like sub-Saharan Africa. Obviously the languages and the cultures are totally different, but there's a connection to Africa, and I think that would be just fascinating from a human perspective, possibly more than a wildlife perspective.
Yeah, no, awesome. So now let's talk a little bit about you, the writer, the author. So I believe you've written or co-written 4 books, 3 more related to your experience as a wildlife guide, and then 1 more, I guess, kind of like a view about apartheid, maybe, you know, what you kind of experienced. So how did that all come about?
Well, the one thing, I was never going to be a writer. I was dreadful at it at school, and I remember I had to write as a head ranger. One of my jobs was to write a weekly sightings report, and I wrote my first one and sent it to my father to kind of edit for me. And this is when I was about 24, and I mean, I had a degree, so I should have been able to write in relatively good English.
Yeah.
And my father sent it back to me, and it looked like he just learned to use the track changes function on Word, and it was impossible to go through. I just started again because he had absolutely lambasted me, and he phoned me and said, "What is this? How did you get through school writing English like this?" And of course, I wasn't good but people of my generation and generations younger than me just don't read. You know, people don't read anymore like my
Yeah.
parents used to read, and still read voraciously. And I think that's got a lot to do with why we write so poorly. So through a period of say a year and a bit, my father coached me through the medium of a virtual clenched fist in the art of writing in English. And just after that, I was chatting to a director of the company I worked for, big safari company that's now called And Beyond. And I kept getting these phone calls from the head office saying, you know, do you see X and Y? Do you see wild dogs at Ngala? How often are you seeing them? And I would say to them, but guys, I send you a sightings report every week. Why don't you read the thing? And I said to this director, you know, why is no one reading my sightings reports? And she said to me, she's a doyen of safari. She said, because they're so boring. I said, what? What are you talking about? She said, you use about 35 adjectives per noun. It's just, I can't even get through the first paragraph. And another director then handed me a book by Douglas Adams called Last Chance to See, which is about a trip that he did with a British biologist called Mark Corwardine. And they went around the world finding, I think it was seven endangered species. And I mean, Douglas Adams was a hilarious writer. And he wrote this book about a tremendously serious subject, the extinction of 7 iconic world species. But he made it so funny and so accessible. And from that, I was so inspired by it. And so I totally changed the way I wrote after reading that book. And I started enjoying it as well, because, you know, I realized that I had a way of being amusing on paper. And there's no greater compliment in the world for me than somebody coming up to me and saying, I read your book and I laughed out loud. That's the greatest compliment I can hear. And so, you know, shortly after that, a friend of mine said, well, why don't we write a book together? And we, 4 of us, ended up writing a book called Whatever You Do, Don't Run, which was just, we all wrote 4 stories and put them in a little book. And that did quite well. And then I didn't think about it again for some time until I met a chap. I went back, I left the bush for a while and went to Cape Town and did my master's. And then I came back to a place called Londolozi, a very famous game reserve. And I met a chap called Duncan, who's now the general manager there. And he said to me over half a bottle of very fine malt whiskey one evening, he said, let's write a book about this ridiculous lifestyle that is living in a 5-star lodge. Anyway, for various reasons, he couldn't carry on with the project, and I did. And from that process, from that chat and my conversations with Duncan, came a book called A Year in the Wild.
Yeah.
And it really is just a light-hearted romp through the life of a 5-star game lodge. And I don't know if you remember Fawlty Towers, that magnificent British film. It's basically Fawlty Towers in the bush. Well, that's the attempt. I'm not for one second suggesting it's as good as that, but that's the idea. And it did pretty well in South Africa. And then I wrote a sequel to that, which was great fun. That's called Back to the Bush. And the third book was, I wanted to write something a little bit more serious. And it started off as a non-fiction commentary on South African society. And I went to lunch with the publisher who very kindly published my other 2 books, not my publisher. And she said to me, James, as a white male South African, you cannot write this book. This is not interesting for, you know, you're not the right demographic. You come from the most privileged demographic in South Africa. So you can't write this book, which I, you know, took as a great, I was hugely offended by that, you know, as all of us with fragile egos are. And I went home and I thought, well, why don't I just fictionalize it? And that's what I did. And I was born in 1976, which was I suppose, the start of the real build-up to apartheid's or to the protests to apartheid. The ANC was in, was it in, it wasn't, there were certainly people in exile, definitely. There were a lot of the leaders were in exile. And in 76, there was the Soweto riots and the Sharpeville massacre, which was, you know, a whole lot of policemen shooting at unarmed, unarmed school kids, essentially. It wasn't Sharpeville. Anyway, the Soweto riots, it was a disaster. And it was the kind of a state of emergency was declared, and that was the year I was born. And then the year I finished school was 94, which was the same year that we had our first democratic election. So it was kind of a nice period to set it. So it started sort of, it was going to be an autobiography, and I mean about 50% of it is probably autobiographical. But really, it's not, it's so interesting to see how people have interpreted it. It's not a serious commentary. There's a lot of humor in the book because that's the best way to learn about stuff.
Yep.
And it's just a kind of, it does, you know, if you look carefully at it, you'll think, cheapers, that was a really rough time for some people and a really good time for others. But the idea is that it's a kind of humorous look. Again, if I can compare it to a British comedy, great. The Blackadder, I don't know if you know,
yep.
the Blackadder series, that First World War series, you know, it's an absolutely hilarious series set against the backdrop of one of humanity's greatest tragedies, greatest follies, which was the First World War. And this is an amusing tale told in the backdrop of a tremendously serious situation.
Yep. No, awesome. So
those are the 3 books.
No, great. So what do you have planned for your writing now going forward?
I'm doing a 3rd book about the bush.
Yep.
So this one, we had A Year in the Wild, we've had Back to the Bush, and this one is called Return to the Wild. That's the working title. I'm not sure if the publisher would accept that. And this is kind of, it's 3.5 years after the last one was set. Characters have moved on a bit, they've grown up a bit. They're a little bit more senior in their lives and in their positions. Yeah, and I don't know where it's going to go yet, and that's the great joy of writing these things. Once you've developed the characters, they kind of take on a life of their own. So we'll see. That's in the very early stages, but it's about say 50,000 words in, which is awesome. It's a good start.
No, brilliant. Yeah. So what is it you enjoy so much about writing?
I think I enjoy telling stories, and I enjoy trying to be funny. I enjoy trying to be funny on paper. And often because of it, people expect me to be kind of a life and soul of the party, if you know what I mean. Yeah. I'm really not like that at all. I'm really quite introverted, especially in a situation where I don't know people. And so I'm not a life and soul of anyone's party. And I think where people, the joy that people derive from that kind of activity, I get from my writing. And like I say, when people say, gosh, that's funny, I think I've succeeded. You know? It's like an art form. It's just it is an art form, and it's the joy of completing a work of art that you can be proud of.
Yeah, no, great. Which kind of I guess is also why you enjoy being a musician, and then the photography part as well. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, music I've done since I was young. I always sung, and then I picked up a guitar first when I was about 13, I think, and I've played ever since.
Yep.
And I did classical guitar a lot when I started. I played in a few deeply unsuccessful bands, but I've never stopped playing. And when I lived in the bush, I played a lot around the campfire for guests. At Londolozi, I used to play just about every night, which was great. I really enjoyed doing that. It's something about performance. I taught guitar for a while. That's a very special person that can do that for a long time. I wouldn't go back to that if I could avoid it. teaching children who really don't want to be there is tricky. And there are a lot of great saintly teachers out there who do it as a career. And I take my hat off to them on a constant basis. Anyway, yeah, but the music is just a creative outlet. And I like to do, I do these live shows once a month where this year I'm doing sort of themed months. Last year was Irish, which it was just after St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
I don't know what the first one, I've forgotten what the first one was. Anyway, we did a Christmas concert as well. We did a Valentine's concert in February. So with live streaming now, it's such an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
So I enjoy doing that hugely. Yeah.
Awesome.
And then the photography is very much I can't draw at all. I've got no sense of proportion. And I started taking pictures very late. I didn't ever take them as a guide. I'm quite sad about that because, I could have got some great stuff. I could have learned how to take photographs earlier.
Yeah.
I'm a relatively novice photographer. I've been doing it for about 5 years, say. But I really love it. I love shooting stuff, stills or video. My wife and I go on these trips and we shoot little series, which is just massive fun. We have a great time, and she edits them all together, which is the real artistic process of it. And it's great. That's a tremendous creative outlet. And we write little voiceovers for them, and it's great.
No, awesome.
So that's where the photography comes in. Yeah.
Sounds like you have a lot of fun. So
we do. Yeah.
Cool. So, well, let's change direction a little bit. How about you're someone now in their 40s. When you hit 40, did you go through any kind of like process of evaluating your life or changing direction, or it was just non-starter? You didn't really worry about it. So, how did 40 come about for you?
No, I think I did worry about it. I mean, I remember when I turned 30, I was still playing rugby, very bad rugby, but I was playing for a club in Cape Town. And, I felt, I'm not too old for this. I'm fitter and stronger than I was when I was 25. I was as fast as I was when I was 25. And so, that was kind of a non-event. It was a milestone, but it was kind of and when I turned 40, there were two things. One, there was definitely an acknowledgement that, or a feeling that I was moving from youth to middle age, to the extent that, if you get a little bit injured when you're going for a run or something like that, things just don't heal quite as fast as they used to.
Yeah.
You play touch rugby with people who are younger than you, and where you just know that you would easily have either burned somebody or caught them. They run away from you now. And I remember thinking, gosh, that's not great. But the second part of that is that I only got married last year.
Yep.
And I think that made a big difference, because in my parents' generation, you generally got married a lot earlier. And by the time you were 40, you had kids that were, I don't know, between the ages of, say, 6 and 15, somewhere around there. And you had a certain role to play. And I think that 40 was a stage of life that was possibly more compartmentalized than it is now.
Yep.
I think that turning 40 now, given how late people get married, how late they have kids, or how early they have kids, it's not quite the same for everybody, which means that it's not this, it doesn't feel the same for everybody getting there. That said, I have definitely felt very conscious of it as each birthday after 40 has come. And I mean, I'm obsessive about exercising and maintaining my flexibility and maintaining my fitness, because I desperately don't want it to go downhill. And I'm be honest with you, I've struggled with that. I've found it not difficult to maintain that sort of stuff, but difficult to accept that physically, we're just not the same as we were.
Yeah.
And I think I'm coming to terms with it now as I head towards my mid-40s. I'll be 40. How old will I be this year? I'll be 45 this year. That's a terrifying thought. And but I don't feel I've, you know, I've I don't know why I'm bringing up sports analogies, because I've always been a really dreadful sportsman, but I run, and
Yeah.
you know, when I run middle longish distances, I'm probably in the best shape that I've ever been. So that's good. You know, it's a different, I'm not as fast as I used to be, but you know, over the distances, I still feel good.
Yeah.
And I think the trick for me, and as a musician, you know, the older you get, the better you get. There's really, unless you have some kind of muscular or neurological problem, really there's no reason for you not to continually improve as a musician,
Yep.
which is hugely important to me. So that's why music is a massive thing for my life, because it's not something that's ever going to leave me. One day I'm going to have to stop playing touch rugby. Maybe when I'm 70, maybe when I'm 60, I don't know. But I'll never have to stop playing the guitar unless, you know, I have some kind of major health issue.
Yeah.
And photography the same. And so I guess for me, it's substituting youthful pursuits with things that I can still improve at. So it's not downhill, it's uphill for my music, it's uphill for photography, it's uphill for writing. You know, as a writer, you're going to get better and better and better.
Yep.
If you practice it. There's no reason you shouldn't, again, unless you have a major health issue. So those three things are hugely important as I go forward, because they make me feel like I'm heading towards something as opposed to away from something.
Yep.
That makes sense.
No, definitely. So,
Yeah.
so what would your advice be to anyone approaching 40 or has just reached 40, maybe viewing it negatively or some anxiety? You know, like you just mentioned,
Yeah.
it's not downhill, it's actually uphill. So, you know, what would you have to say to them?
I think that there's definitely a switch that comes. I mean, it's the physical thing for most people, because we don't feel the same as we used to. It takes longer to get fitter, and because that's the only real thing that changes when you're in this kind of stage of life. Your mind's just as sharp as it ever was. It holds more information than it ever held before. But you know, you have niggles. Obviously, the chances of becoming sick with a serious disease increase as you get older, and so all these things are a worry. But at the same time, my advice would be switch. Find something that you can continually get good at, and there are lots and lots of things that you can do. You're never going to be as fast as you are, but if you like to be physically active, you know, your 40s and 50s are the really sweet spot for long distance sports. So be it paddling, running, cycling, whatever it is, and you know, eventually that's going to switch too. But things like art, if you are artistic, I'm definitely not, photography, music, those sorts of things will continue to improve. And so you've got to switch your focus onto those sorts of things. And I mean, for me also, I'm hoping to have an offspring at some stage. And I suppose that will be, for a lot of people, that happened much earlier. But for me, that's something to look forward to, and something that I will, you know, it's one of the reasons I try and stay fit, is that if I am lucky enough to have a kid, then, you know, I need to be fit and strong.
Yep.
So that I can do all the things that kids need you to do.
Yep. No, definitely. So what's your definition of living a legendary life or your best life?
For me, it's not wasting time. You know, I try desperately not to waste any time. I try and get up very early every morning. I try not to waste time watching things on TV. I don't, you know, for the sake of watching them.
Yeah.
I try and read a lot. Obviously, I don't always succeed. I try not to get too down on myself about that sort of stuff, but to appreciate the time that I have and use it fully, I think, is the definition of a legendary life. Not to waste what is becoming increasingly precious. You know, it's definitely something that I'm sure you are increasingly aware of, and that is the passing of time, which you just aren't when you're 20. You're so stupid when you're 20. You're barely not stupid when you're 30. And when you're 40, that passing of time and the understanding of mortality is so much higher.
Yeah.
And so for me, living a legendary life is to live a life that doesn't waste the time that you have.
Yep. No, as you said, time is a pretty rare commodity when you're getting older.
Yeah.
So do you have a particular life motto, you know, something that kind of resonates with you?
I don't really. No, this is going to sound a bit stupid, but there was I don't know if you remember that ridiculous film G.I. Jane way back when, and the trainer or command master chief gives a poem at the very beginning, and I think it's Yeats. I think it's William Butler Yeats, but it could be Keats. I might be wrong.
Yeah.
And it goes something like, "I never saw a wild thing sorry for itself. A small bird will fall frozen from a bough without ever having felt sorry for itself." And for me, it's a good one, because, and I say it to myself relatively frequently, because, you know, there's so much that can get you down,
Yeah.
but there's so much to look forward to if you just open your eyes and, you know, make an effort. You never have enough money, you never have enough time, you never, whatever, you know, but there's so much that, especially for people who, you know, I was blessed with an education. I was blessed with a real head start in life that so many people just aren't, especially in my country. You know, it's a desperate place in many respects. And so, you know, if I do have a motto, it's that poem where I need to remind myself never to feel sorry for myself, given what I have.
No, it's a very good insight. Like, I think a lot of people don't realize they have a lot of good things in life and focus too much on the things that are not going well for them. And then in reality, they have a lot. And then, especially as you said, if you're able to look outside of yourself, you'll come to realize you do have a lot of good things. So what are to close out, what are 3 life lessons you've learned in life that you think are, you know, invaluable and would, you know, perhaps help other people?
3 life lessons. I think appreciating time with family, especially as my parents have got older, appreciating every minute with them, because one day they will be gone.
Yeah.
And I think that's, for me at the moment, tremendously important. Don't waste time, as I said, you know, that's a major life lesson for me. Obviously, you need to rest, and you should rest when you need to rest, and there's nothing wrong with resting. But if you're not resting, you know, don't dick around. Find something useful to yourself. It doesn't have to be, you know, you don't have to go out and be a saint, but find something useful for yourself. And the 3rd life lesson would be, I guess, just get up and go and do, you know, don't think about it too much. We spend a lot of time thinking about things we should or want or could be doing, and then we go back to our jobs and we don't do them, thinking that we'll do them later, and later comes hell of a fast. So just go and do would be my 3rd one.
Excellent. Well, James, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. I'm sure a lot of people will get value from this. So if anyone's interested, no, they definitely will. It's pretty insightful. I really enjoyed it. So if anyone's interested in finding out a little bit more about you, how can they find you online?
They'll find me on Instagram. If you look up James R.A. Hendry, James R.A. Hendry, same on Facebook. Otherwise, I've got a website, jameshendry.co.za. Otherwise, you'll find my weekly writings on africageographic.com, which is the magazine I edit at the moment.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.